For another perspective on the talks to reach a compromise over the nation's debt limit, let's go to Ike Brannon. He is the Director of Economic Policy and Congressional Relations at the American Action Forum, and he's a former chief economist for the Republican Policy Committee. He says the two sides actually aren't that far apart. Mr. Brannon joins us from our Washington newsroom. Mr. Brannon, welcome to Bottom Line. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having me.
You say the sides are pretty close. How close?
Well, I mean, the last numbers that came out of the closed-door negotiations suggested that they had reached about an agreement to get to about $2 trillion worth of cuts, and John Boehner's goal was to get to $2.4 trillion before he put it before the Congress. So $400 billion over a decade, which is how CBO scores it, is relatively narrow in my mind.
So you think that there will be a compromise?
So I do think there will be some kind of compromise at some point. I don't believe we'll ever get close to a point where the markets collapse. In fact, there are former Obama economic advisors who are in Wall Street telling people two things. A, that there will be a deal reached, they should relax about this, and also that the August 2nd deadline is kind of a soft deadline in their words. So I think the Obama people are, at least if not optimistic, they're telling people in Wall Street not to worry.
A lot of people in Wall Street maybe aren't worried, but a lot of Americans apparently seem to be worried about this. Is there a cause for serious alarm? Because as you just said, that August 2nd date, it's kind of a soft deadline. But if you listen to what some of the folks on the Democratic side have been saying, the repercussions for not at least raising the debt ceiling could be catastrophic. Today, the senator from Virginia, Mark Warner, he said in an op-ed, he said, it doesn't take an MBA to recognize that the only way to close that gap and restore fiscal stability is to attack both sides of the ledger. And he continued, we must cut spending, including defense and entitlements, and we must find reasonable ways to increase revenue. Does that sound like a fair compromise? And is that something that you think is probably going to be on the table?
Look, we have a gigantic deficit hole we need to deal with. We have a $14 trillion debt. We have a deficit, an annual deficit of $1.5 trillion. If we need to do more things later, and we definitely will need to do more besides what we're doing right here, there'll be plenty of time to increase taxes later. I think Mickey Kaus put it the right way. Every time we reach one of these balance, tax increases, spending decreases. What happens after a year, we forget about the spending decreases and we're left with the tax increases. Why don't we show the American people that we can cut $2.4 trillion from the budget, and then if we stick to our guns for a year or two, the next time we have to make a major bite off the apple, which is going to happen sooner than people realize, then maybe we can put some kind of tax increase on the table then.
Well, our Hans Nichols was just telling us from the White House that entitlement spending could be part of the mix here, and part of that could add up to perhaps maybe $4 trillion as opposed to the $2 trillion that's on the table. Are we going to see at this point, with the president and the Republican leadership coming together, will, at least on the tax side, will we see more tax increases or more spending cuts this time around?
I think it's going to be almost all spending cuts. What Hans was saying, really, I'm kind of pleased by that. It would be great if they tackled such things like the indexation, the progressive index, tackled the indexation problem we have with Social Security. The big problem with Social Security is that benefits increase above and beyond the rate of inflation for every single person who retires. That means if I retire 10 years after you and we have the same income we make every single year, my benefits will be bigger, even if I'm the richest guy in the United States.
Right.
It makes no sense at all, and Republicans have talked about scaling that back before for upper income people.
Well,
for whatever reason, the Democrats won't do this for upper income people now.
Well, Mr. Brannon, as Hans was also telling us, that it seems one of the things that might be on the table is actually changing the Social Security index. Would that help?
So it would help a lot in the long run. If you did that for the top 1/3 of all earners, which is, I'm sure, what they're talking about, 10, 20 years down the line, that would make Social Security much more viable in the long run. The difficulty, I think, is that in the short run, I think if you phase that in over 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, you might not see very many savings until the end of the 10-year budget window.
Mr. Brannon, if I could ask you in the last minute, as I mentioned, you were formerly with the Republican Policy Committee. Do you ever remember the atmosphere in Washington being this toxic, and is that prohibitive to a deal?
You know, I've been in D.C. for about a decade. I don't know. To me, it's never really been that friendly between the Republicans and Democrats, where they're fighting over important ideas, they're fighting over important political ground. To me, it's always been somewhat toxic when you start talking about these negotiations. And the other thing, it seems like every negotiation I've ever been a part of, it always boils down to the last 48 hours when people really get down and do things.
Why do you suppose that
we
is? Why do they always wait until the last minute?
What's the rule? Never negotiate with yourself. Why give up something when you've got more time to push the other side?
All right, Ike Brannon, Director of Economic Policy and Congressional Relations at American Action Forum, joining us from our bureau in Washington. Mr. Brannon, thanks so much. Appreciate your time today.